There are four main reasons that people end up in Paris from America. One, for love of a boy or girl. Two, to study. Three, for a job transfer. Or four, for a cheap retirement. What I came for was a change in life. I was in a midlife crisis. I was thousands of dollars in debt. I was single and I had no real direction. When I got here, I fell in love with the city. And in the 8 years since, I've learned a lot about what makes life here so much better than the alternative in the US. So I would like to take you with me on a little bit of a journey and share with you these 8 lessons I've learned, with a warning that if you stay till the end, you may then feel an overwhelming urge to chuck everything to the wind, pack a suitcase, and find your way here yourself. So subscribe and hit the notification buttons if you're so inclined. But in the meantime, let's get into living in detail. Anywhere you go, give it on. First, I want to talk about the principles of being an American versus being a French citizen, and then how it bleeds into life in Paris. I don't know how often you think about the mottos of the United States of America. I grew up thinking that the motto was equality, freedom, and the pursuit of happiness. Turns out that's not the motto, but it's kind of a revolutionary, well, it is a revolutionary concept, or was back in the 1700s. So much so that the French, when they had their revolution, loved the idea and copied it. But in my opinion, they made it a bit better because they kept the first two and they re-examined the third one. And for a while they thought, let's make that the right to property instead of the pursuit of happiness. However, through debate, they chucked that out for fraternity, fraternité, which is basically brotherly love. And I am so moved by that distinction between choosing the pursuit of happiness and choosing brotherly love. There was a massive terrorist attack in Paris in November of 2015, and it rocked France and Europe similarly to the way 9/11 rocked the US. And having lived in the US during the 9/11 attack, and then being in Paris for the 2015 attack, I was struck by how different the reaction of the general populace was. And to be fair, the reaction of the government was. In the US, if you remember, there was shock that anyone could attack the great US of A. There was fear that more attacks would come. And there was rage, a need for vengeance. In France, by contrast, when the attacks happened, the energy on the street was sadness, not rage. It was deep grief, a need for mourning. And the second driving emotion, if you could call it that, was a cry for peace. And there were demonstrations calling for peace and diplomacy. And to me, that was, wow, that was like revolutionary. And I still get emotional about it because I don't believe in vengeance. And it felt so much more sane to have emotions of grief and try to find a way to move forward into a better world as opposed to creating more chaos and death. And I believe that that is directly aligned with this idea of brotherly love. The French are not individualistic the way the Americans are. And there are great things that come out of individualism, but building a healthy, sane, livable life, in my experience, is not one of them. So that distinction is critical and is the foundation for pretty much every other distinction and learning I have come to in the last 8 years. The second one being the importance of history. So Americans are very forward thinking. We're very innovative. Everything is about tomorrow. And the French are steeped in their past. And you see it in Paris. Every time you walk out the door or look out the window, you're looking at proof of 2,000 years, 3,000 years of history. In the US, we've done everything we can to eradicate history. In fact, we don't really even acknowledge anything that happened more than 200, 250 years ago. It's not that this is a static place in any stretch of the imagination, but there is an honoring of what has come before and how we can learn from the past and carry the past with us. And that includes the past generations. So you don't disappear at the age of 40, or if you live in LA at the age of 30. And that, as I get older, is something that I find extraordinary, beautiful, reassuring. And you see that so much on public transportation. So that's the third thing. Public transportation. Holy fucking A. We know that public transportation changes the beat of a city, gives health to a city, and equalizes economic differences more. But wow, it's also just so much easier to live with good public transportation. If you had told me when I lived in LA that I didn't need a car, that I wouldn't want a car, I would have thought you're fucking insane. And here, I don't need a car. I can walk everywhere if I have the time. It takes 2.5 hours maybe to walk the entire distance of the city. But if I don't want to walk or I don't have time to walk, I have buses, I have trams, I have metros, and it's clean for the most part, aside from the bits of pee occasionally. But it's for the most part clean and runs on time, and overall is just a joy. Like, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for that civic gift. And that brings me to the general concept of time. It's different here. Time is measured differently here. It's longer. In the US, everything felt like a hustle. Everything felt like a rush. Busy, 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 busy. Here, time is valued here. It's not a hustle culture, a joie de vivre, a joy of life culture. For example, by law, as a salaried employee, you are given minimum 5 weeks of vacation a year. That is a law. Additionally, the retirement age is less than that in the US. It just went up this past year from 62 to 64, which is a massive scandal. But still, even at 64, that's lower than in many other countries. And you have a pension plan here that works. You have, of course, free healthcare. I have a ton to say about it, but it'll take like a whole other video. And speaking of videos, if you want to subscribe, please, I would love that. That really helps the channel, and click on the notification button. Anyway, vacation time is valued, and if you don't take it, HR will chase after you for not taking it, as opposed to in the US where they kind of frown on you taking it. Additionally, there's a law that says you are not allowed to send emails after working hours or on the weekends. In practice, that doesn't always work that way. Like, you can send emails, but if you don't open them or you don't respond to them, there's no ability for the company to penalize you for that. So the pressure to be checking your emails on the weekends or checking the email as soon as you leave the office or after dinner, it's entirely removed. And that, just that alone, for fuck's sake, is a life changer. It's a life changer. So there's that. There's also 35-hour work week in France. Most companies, especially global companies, you're working more than 35 hours. However, it's acknowledged and you're given credit for that because you get extra days, which are called RTT days, which take into account the likelihood that you have worked more than 35 hours in your weeks. And so in any given year, you have, in addition to that 5 weeks mandatory holiday, you have an additional number of days, usually between 8 and 12 per year, that you are granted for the fact that you are most likely working more than 35 hours a week. But you basically have between 7 and, if you're working in a state company, 11 weeks of vacation a year, paid, and you're told you have to take it. Additionally, you really need to take your lunch break. If you don't take your lunch break, people look at you oddly. It's not rewarded that you work through lunch. There is never a lunch meeting where food is brought in and you work through lunch. You take the full hour. Usually you go out to eat. There are two company sponsored lunch plans. There is the cafeteria, so you have access to that, and the price of everything in the cafeteria is significantly lower than how much you would pay at a restaurant. Or you have restaurant tickets, which is now basically like a credit card. It has a certain amount of money on it, and you can use it for any restaurant, or you can also use it to buy groceries. And so for junior staff, frequently they use it and they buy their week's groceries with this card. Or senior staff usually use it to go out to nicer restaurants that are sit down restaurants with white tablecloths and the occasional glass of wine. And yeah, that exists and it's not frowned upon. And I hope it never goes away, because it means that you can get to know your coworkers and you develop that conviviality, you develop that brotherly love, in a way, because you have time to interact and not only be talking about the latest PowerPoint or Excel or email or whatever the fuck. I don't think I could ever go back. I don't think I could ever go back to working the American 60-hour work week with no lunch breaks. And you've got to talk about food and portion size. Every time I have friends from the US or family come to Paris, they remark on the portion size. They're concerned about whether they're going to have enough to eat. I have the opposite reaction when I go to the States. I look at the portion sizes and I'm like, my God. And suddenly that smaller portion size is no longer smaller. It becomes the new normal, as does the use of sugar. Every time I go back to the States, I'm shocked, I tell you, shocked by how sugary, how sweet everything is. Like super sweet and super salty, but mostly super sweet. Even the things that shouldn't be sweet are sweet. And not even good, just sweet. I'm grateful for how delicious food is here. When I first moved here and I would walk by a boulangerie, I would literally want to purchase at least one of every single pastry on offer. I don't think there was a single day in the first couple of years I lived here that I did not have a pastry. And that doesn't even count croissants and pain au chocolat. Now, I go by those boulangeries all the time, and I'm actually hard pressed frequently to decide on one. I still think they're beautiful. I still am attracted to the details of the designs and the color, the construction of it all. But I no longer feel the urge to eat it all. And I don't have the same craving for sugar the way I did when I lived in the US. My closet is tiny, just like my apartment is. My refrigerator, until just very recently, was a dorm room size refrigerator. Living in a really small space means you can't have more. I might see something on the internet and have that moment of like, oh, I wish I could have that, or oh, I need that. I have to think, okay, well, what am I getting rid of first to make room for that? Because there's literally no space in my apartment for something new unless I get rid of something. I don't immediately feel willing to chuck something I already have in order to get something new. Additionally, because there are these sold periods, these 5 to 6 weeks, twice a year, where everything goes on substantial sale, you always know in the back of your head that that's going to happen. And so I find myself more and more used to that cultural expectation. And so when I see something, I think, okay, I'm going to wait until the solds for that. I don't really desperately need it right this second. So I'll wait a couple of months till the solds come. And then every single time, it's actually kind of annoying how often this happens, but every single time when the solds come around, I've lost that urge to buy whatever it is that I thought I could not do without. So the amount of savings I've had just from living in a place that has that kind of construct is extraordinary. There's so many beautiful things about living a smaller life that I don't want to see go away in the US. I was taught from the time I was 18 to walk with my keys, my car keys between my fingers to use as a stabbing instrument if I was ever attacked. That's how I grew up in the US. I grew up stressed if two cars stopped and the driver started having an argument, waiting for somebody to pull out a gun. I have never once felt that fear here. There are not guns here for the most part. So, yeah, I might have my backpack stolen. I might have my wallet or my passport stolen, or all the above in certain cases. But I'm not going to get shot and killed for no reason. And you do not realize how much underlying stress you live with of that fear as a woman of bodily harm, firearm harm. You don't realize how much you carry until you live in a place where that is not a reality. I would not give up that sense of security and sense of relief and sense of freedom for the world. The French are way more private than Americans. Like, as Americans, we will bleed our soul to anyone and everyone, and we ask very probing questions of people, like, intimate things immediately. And here there is a reserve whereby you're not allowed very far in to knowing somebody quickly. Friendships last forever, but they take a really long time to build. And being invited into somebody's house, for example, is a big deal. And that is true the older you get. If you're moving here in your 30s, 40s, 50s, and you don't have that school access or kids, it is hard to get entree into other people's lives, particularly Parisian people's lives. And so there's an adjustment period that is necessary to realize that they're not unfriendly. That's just that their idea of what makes friendliness is different. And Americans are notoriously smiley and effusive, and the Parisians are not so smiley, but deeply kind, deeply generous, and deeply loyal. So if you build the patience and have the integrity to create the building blocks of a friendship here is just, it's golden. So that's a lot. That's a lot. I got a little wordy, but I hope that that gives you an inkling of what it's like to live in Paris and why I love it so much after 8 years. Please leave in the comments below any thoughts you have, any questions you have. I am always open and eager to answer your questions and to know what you guys might be thinking about. So with that, I will leave you with a salut, gros bisous, à plus. Anywhere you go, you belong. Anywhere you said, anywhere.